Hey everybody, Will and Matt back again with the Bonus Action Podcast, Episode 3. Today, a topic that doesn't seem all that exciting on the surface, but has
Underrated.
become very, something I'm very fond of every time stuff like this has come up in our campaigns. Just sort of, I guess, social events, weddings, funerals, court cases, sort of RPing through these situations that aren't, part of the traditional sort of adventuring and combat.
It's kind of the social encounters that aren't negotiations or parties. The other things that are a very big part of real life and amazing moments if you can really nail the feel of them in an RPG. The three that you mentioned there are ones that are great talking points, and we should hit each of them. Let's start with weddings. Weddings in a D&D game. What does that mean? Having a wedding in a D&D game, how does that even happen?
Well, obviously it could be between player characters, or I think that's probably less common. It's more likely to be either between NPCs and the player characters get invited, or a player character and an NPC. Obviously, a lot of... there's a story there in particular we'll get to. I think a lot of players are... We kind of talked about this a little bit in the backstory thing, hesitant to form any bonds with anything in the campaign world, period. Because
anything
it's like,
the DM can kill, you
right.
don't want to get too attached to, usually.
So I think a lot of players are sort of hesitant to go the sort of romance route.
Also, it can be very uncomfortable.
Yes.
You being a DM, me being a DM, we both know that trying to RP a character being romantic with one of your friends is not a super comfortable thing. So I think that's an important thing to hit on. When you're doing a wedding, focus more on the fun of the event. You don't need to focus on the romance of it. You don't need to look deeply into your character's eyes and recite vows to them, although that could be weird and fun. Focus more on the fun.
And if you're an RP heavy play group, don't feel bad if some of those interactions are a little less RP heavy.
Yeah.
You're right. It just it gets, and that was something we sort of learned, our very first campaign was just look, I'm not going to RP through any of this.
Just so you know, she's into you.
This will be hand wavy, and we're moving on.
To avoid uncomfortableness. And I mean, playgroups are individuals, but in general, shy away from overdoing the romance RP into your D&D or other RPG.
Well, it fits into the whole social contract conversation. You don't want players to go too far outside of comfort zones.
Mm-hmm.
Just over the course of play in general. So it's just related back to that conversation. So this part of the story here.
The story of the wedding that has been in a game of ours that I can remember. At least the most prominent, memorable wedding that we've had.
I mean, yeah, that's the only... it's definitely the only one involving a PC that I can remember. In our very first campaign, I got another player's character married to a... really very nice, just wonderful half-orc woman that he had a brief drunken affair with.
Mm-hmm.
And as one of the rogues in the party, I thought it was funny to invite her to our village that we were building,
and I, as the DM, thought it'd be funny if she would show up pregnant to that village.
So we asked. The first thing I did was ask what the wedding was, which meant there was going to be a wedding. Maddie G's character just about killed me. It would have been deserved. So that was that whole session was all the preparations and everything for this big grand wedding, sending out invites all across 2 different empires.
Yeah.
Every NPC we had ever interacted with just about was invited.
Mm-hmm. At least all the ones you'd want to invite to a social event.
Which was part of the fun of it too, and I think that's part of what's fun about events like this is a chance to bring all of these NPCs and characters sort of back together.
And to make them dress up. Just throwing that out there. Like, nothing's better than, like, the barbarian having to put on a suit. And so those the moments where everyone gets together for a happy occasion where all these different disparate band of ne'er-do-wells, like the D&D group itself, come together for a happy moment.
Well, yeah, and it was just NPCs we hadn't seen since early on in the campaign. It was friends and contacts and acquaintances, just sort of all in the same place and all for the same, there for the same reasons. And of course, they don't have to be combat encounters. There was one. Sometimes in that wedding.
Sometimes borderline cyborg pirate villain from a previous adventure arc has to get his revenge, and it happens to be on one character's wedding day.
That got weird.
It always does. The point there is, though, it's all right for those kind of social events to just be that, a social event where the players RP and have fun. But it's also totally fine to throw an encounter as part of it. And it could be a combat encounter or a non-combat encounter.
And it's easy to do bar fights or send the rogue in the party out on a mini mission to trying to find the wedding cake or whatever.
The ring's been stolen and they have to get it back before the actual game starts.
It's easy to mix regular sort of D&D encounters and sort of side quests and activities and stuff into those big social events. It just gives a sort of an umbrella to tie it all together beneath.
To kind of connect with this too, real world weddings are a good excuse for wedding themed one-shots. Something that actually very recently I ran for a group of friends. One of the other Matthews on the channel, Matt G, got married recently, and we had our kind of morning getting ready before we went to his wedding, and we did a one-shot. And that one-shot was a kobold party that I just kind of... We can go into more detail on it maybe later. I guess I can kind of break it down of here. Basically just I gave all the players a kobold stat block and I let them choose one skill to be good at, and they got a bonus to that one instead of the regular kobold skill. And then they each got a different kind of magic item from a dragon's hoard that they could try and use creatively to solve problems. Their mission was to go and get back a ring, a fancy magical ring that was stolen from this dragon's hoard that they lived in, so that one of the kobolds could use it to propose to the dragon that he was so in love with that they all worshipped. The dragon being the stand-in for Matt G's wife, and Matt G being one of those kobolds. And it was amazing, and it was hilarious, and all the players being this band of hooligan kobolds all dressing up as a dude in a trench coat meant lots of shenanigans ensued. But real world weddings can be a fun time to make a themed goofy one shot.
Yeah, it just sort of gives you an excuse to play. And they're just... I'm a big fan in tabletop RPGs of like sort of breaking, at least occasionally breaking out of the mold of like traditional dungeon crawling or traditional like combat mechanics. Not that our campaigns necessarily have a ton of the kind of dungeon crawling stuff in it anyway.
Not a ton.
But it's just like weddings, funerals, and stuff like court cases are just really they're excellent times to showcase characters and for people to RP characters. And they're also just excellent ways to sort of step out of that mold.
They're kind of a breath of fresh air, honestly. Yeah. Especially if you're in a campaign or in a section of a campaign that's particularly combat heavy or emotionally draining at times. If you're in something that's been very tense and hardcore and you've been chasing down some big thing for a long time, having a moment where all the players just, as their characters, have fun together is both a fun, relaxing moment for the characters and for the players. We all love D&D and we play D&D because we want to have epic adventures and go on these quests. But these peaceful moments in between are kind of nice.
Well, and I think the Pork Festival which started out as a joke and then quickly that campaign was to a lot of degrees defined by like, be careful what jokes you make at the table,
because the canon will be used against you. Always do that as a DM, by the way. Any joke made, can and should be used against players.
And that was an excellent example of that, was just latching onto the name of the city, Rendaham, and like, it's just like, well, it's got ham in the name. They must really like pork.
I wonder if there's a pork festival. And I just went to my notepad and wrote Rendaham Pork Festival.
And that was
underlined.
That was one of my favorite sessions of the entire campaign, was like sort of being, you know, let out on parole, you know, from the gladiator school, to just like, it's sort of given a little budget to like just drink and gamble and
play games
and you know, and you know, and it had a sort of mechanical benefit as far as like winning magic items and meeting some NPCs and stuff that we would run into again much later in the campaign as sort of valuable contacts and
there was intentional stuff planted there for the long term of the story, but it was also just a fun session where I, as the DM, got to come up with a bunch of events and games that would be at a festival like that and let you guys play.
Yeah, mud wrestling and archery contests and drinking contests and a couple different
halfling toss. Who could throw a halfling the farthest with a halfling in the party, 2 halflings in the party, and meant for really good times.
Well, one of the halflings threw the other halfling.
And did they win? I think. Did you guys win?
No, Brandon. So you gave Costigan's character Tom gauntlets of ogre power. The only time in any one of your campaigns.
I learned my lesson very quickly on those.
That will ever happen. And despite that, Brandon's character, I think, just crit the throw with like a rented halfling.
Yeah.
And won it anyway. I lost all my money, or most of my money, at gambling.
Which was very fitting for the character.
Yes.
I think Matt Costigan's halfling won the mud wrestling.
The farm boy flinger.
The farm boy flinger. So this is the point here. When you can tell just by us having this conversation right now, these sort of events are some of the most memorable parts of campaigns. And you'd think that the epic battles are, and those are memorable, and there's memorable parts from those, but those fun, hilarious, often goofy and wacky moments are really what kind of comes back around and you reminisce on years down the road. And same thing with weddings, with festivals. Festivals are a perfect example of a non-combat social encounter that's not necessarily a party and is something that you can have encounters inside of, combat or otherwise, but is a kind of break from the usual D&D. Another good example of this in a game we've run is the sort of carnival that you guys went through in the Spelljammer campaign. You were, I don't know if you remember this one very well, but one of my favorite things I came up with was a like mystery prize box in there where you were kind of rolling off of a random item table that I had found, and it could have been anything if you won this certain game.
And it turned out that as soon as we discovered that, we spent pretty much every coin we had on the random item box.
It turns out loot boxes are addictive on video games for a reason. If you add them into your campaign, your players will go broke using them. But it was really fun. You ended up buying a kid a martini on accident through the loot box.
I think I bought myself a martini as well.
I think so.
Through the loot box. I think that was one of those kind of the same thing, but there was like you could wrestle a like space bear.
Yeah.
And I won a baby space bear.
That's true.
Which I just kept.
You got to raise. It was like a owl bear sort of thing. You raise. Yeah. Your character wasn't raising much. He was lowering standards and raising no one.
Yeah. No. And that festival was the same way, where it was just being presented with sort of a variety of games and activities to take part in. And again, some of those came back up because it turns out like the guy running the random mystery box, one of the prizes you could win was supposed to disable Spelljammer ships so that he could steal all their stuff. And that's how he got all the stuff that was in his random item box.
Yeah.
So it's like, and then we had to then deal with that when that little doll deactivated our ship later on. They absolutely, those events should be mixed into the world and into the story. But they don't have to be, I guess, sort of, directly attached. They don't need to be intrinsic in defeating the main villain.
No.
but they should be tied into the world.
And I think we kind of brushed on this when we we're talking about the Pork Festival. These are some of the best opportunities to introduce NPCs to the players. in a way where they make a friend, they make a connection. For the Rinham Pork Festival, the big connection you guys made was Thori, who ends up being the captain of a ship that's kind of their boat to freedom, leaving the continent they were on later on in the game. These kind of characters, it's okay to introduce them in other ways, but it's so fun to introduce them at a festival or at a wedding, where all of a sudden you're at the wedding of two NPCs and one of the people you meet there ends up being a connection you can use later on.
There was a second wedding party in that campaign that I just remembered.
There was a second wedding party.
We were invited to a wedding party in Hakeem that turned into a murder mystery.
Oh, that's right.
That was the party that's, I mean, and that was more sort of a traditional D&D party.
That was like a
in
party
the sense,
party, yeah.
You know, but and it was sort of the one that started our whole running joke about like
trust in parties.
Yeah, just never go to a party in a D&D campaign because somebody will die or
there's always a comment.
Get murdered. There's always something.
From that point on, I think everybody was just like, I wear my armor underneath my suit. I always smuggle a dagger in at least. Like you guys didn't go unarmed into any parties from that point on.
I don't think I didn't. Well, I had to fight a relatively high level assassin NPC in that combat or in that party by myself, like armed just with a dagger, and that was one of those like, wow, if that last attack had gone the other way,
could have been game over. Yeah,
I would have lost my character.
Again,
there was
not all parties have to be combat encounters hidden inside of them, but it's always fun to throw them in there.
Well, and these sort of social events and stuff in general are much more interesting when they're not necessarily combats. I think the court case is a good example of that.
I agree. Also in Spelljammer.
We got arrested essentially for completing a side quest. We completed a side quest and then like a week later, we got arrested for I think smuggling vital strategic information or something like that.
Turns out that this kind of locked box of something you were delivering was a war crime, more or less. You didn't know it at the time. You were told to not know about it, but you did do it, and so there was legal repercussions.
So we got arrested, spent some time in prison, and then went through a court case. We were given a lawyer, and we had to defend ourselves. That was the entirety of a session or two.
Yeah,
was just us in court defending ourselves on the witness stand, giving testimonies,
calling other witnesses, NPCs
giving testimonies both for us and against us.
You giving a testimony for the party, which was basically a testimony against the party because of who you were. It turns out when you're in like a very established colonial British style like space empire and the witness you call to the stand is like a voodoo witch doctor Knoll space pirate, people aren't going to be like, yeah, I trust them. That guy is on their side. They must be good people.
I didn't lie at all my entire time on the stand, which is probably part of the problem.
Definitely part of the problem. But those are fun. I mean, a court case, it's a different sort of encounter like that, and it requires the players to think creatively and differently, and is a good structured way to kind of bring roleplay out, even in players who are less likely to roleplay on their own. When they're called as a witness to the stand, it gives them a sort of podium to try out some roleplay.
That's true.
And to speak, whether it's in character or not, to kind of think as their character would and give the information and the answers that their character
would. And it's an encounter with what feels like very high stakes. That's not a combat encounter or a sort of trying to defuse a bomb encounter. Like it feels like the stakes are very high, but it's not.
But no one has a sword drawn on you.
Right. It just really changes the dynamic of the game in a very interesting way, and it's an easy encounter to let the players fail. There are that's always the issue with being a DM, is that there are some encounters that you don't want the characters to fail, or you can't let the characters fail.
A lot of, especially combat encounters, failure means death, so you don't want to kill off the players.
And you are always writing that, sort of trying to find the balance there, writing that line, because these games have failure as an option. That's part of what I like about them. I don't think any tabletop RPG would be nearly as fun without the risk of failure.
Definitely.
Or in the quite often there are decisions you're making, knowing like in the back of your head, like if this goes wrong, I lose a character here. I think the one of the first times that I was really, really dealing with that was trying to rescue Spardauer's wife.
Yeah.
Where it's like essentially three of us were infiltrating this military fortress, knowing if we mess up here, if something goes wrong, there's no way we get out of this. We can't fight our way out. Like these characters are gone. But that's part of what's fun about the game is having that risk and dealing with it. And so as the DM, you're always trying to find that balance of like, how punishing do I want to be if the characters fail?
Yep.
Because if it's not actually punishing, it feels sort of disingenuous.
Cheap.
Yeah, cheap. Yeah. And something like a court case is a really good encounter that has high, or at least feels like it has high stakes and high risks. But it's okay if the players fail it.
They don't end up, I mean, unless you decided that they're going to the chopping block if they fail. But even then, there's still a chance to escape before.
Right. So then they get sent to a prison, and then they have a whole arc trying to escape, or, they get, in what happened in the Spelljammer campaign, we get essentially sent on a suicide mission.
Mm-hmm. Which is a mission that, it's very unlikely the, royal government would send you guys on a special mission as the space scumbags you were before, but after you've been there and they own your rights to life at that point, you've been found guilty. That gives me as the DM a chance to be like, here is the next mission, the next part of the quest that you can go and kind of send you in that direction.
And railroading isn't a bad thing if it's done sort of in little bite-sized pieces. Exactly. If it's done right. So it's,
and I mean, there was definitely a chance that you guys won that court case and didn't go on that other mission instead. Right. There wasn't a great chance because your character was going to get called onto the stand. And so I felt pretty comfortable as a DM that things weren't going to look good for you guys. Right. But that's a very good way to put it. That a high stakes encounter that can be failed without like a campaign ending cataclysmic, players have died, people are rolling new characters, sort of failure game state.
And we're going to do an episode of this at some point in the future about like standing behind your decisions as a DM and like when do you make a decision about how dangerous something is and go like, it's like, well, they
pushed the big red button.
They walked into the spooky ghost water. You like, and
guess I gotta flip to that page of my notes and actually do what it says it does.
And striking that balance and having those conversations. But that's just the nice thing about social encounters sort of in general, is that like they don't have to be punishing. But the nice thing about court cases is that they feel high stakes and can be high stakes for the flow of the campaign, but they're not unduly punishing necessarily.
Yeah. Well,
and it's interesting to sort of do court case style stuff in other contexts. Like you were talking about, this very sort of British Empire. Mm-hmm. They consider themselves very civilized.
Yeah.
But what if the characters get dragged before a goblin court for burning down another goblin village?
Yeah.
It's like, well, they're just goblins. And
what does Goblin Court look like? I think that the players make a bunch of really good arguments, and then the big goblin just says, "Eat him," like hits them out against the wall.
Or just the idea of like, or the characters have been on a string of killing dragons for dragon hordes and get dragged before a court of dragons for murder.
Yeah.
You don't have to. I think a lot of people's idea of going to court case is either like it's a fixed case and like, they're the heroes and they're trying to defend themselves against the villains, or it's they're the villains and they're trying to defend themselves against these like sort of good, upstanding, civilized folk. But that doesn't have to be the case.
Another good example that you could use in a game is perhaps they've done wrong by some sort of barbarian or tribalistic society that's very like warrior spirit mentality. And all of a sudden their court case might include them having to do like a one-on-one combat or wrestling match with a tribal chieftain or a berserker of a Viking group. That there has to be this blood paid or honor duel in order to right a wrong that they've done. All of this stuff can kind of come together, and there can be a ceremony and a court case sort of hearing that's a part of it.
And same, I'm really the same thing with weddings. Like,
yeah, true.
Like, I just thought of another wedding.
What's another wedding? Oh no.
We set up a wedding between a frogman, a tribal chief. I don't know if he was specifically a bullywug or not.
It's not bullywugs, they're from Chult.
In Chult.
Uh-huh.
Between this like tribal chieftain and his goddess.
Uh-huh.
But his goddess was one or two of our characters in this like silver painted disguise.
Yeah. Yep, you did. That is another wedding. And turns out like tribal jungle frog weddings are a little different than your traditional wedding. Especially when one of the characters is, or one of the people getting married is two characters in a god costume.
But it turns out we've had a lot more weddings. We've been involved with a lot more weddings in D&D than we thought.
You don't think? Yeah, when you really come to it and think about it.
But it's sort of an example of that, I think, of like, weddings can be the same way as court cases, where like the actual mechanics involved. I mean, it could be the same thing. It could involve a trial by combat in some ways. In a culture that like where that is intrinsic to either their form of worship or
their form of government.
Exactly. And that becomes a very interesting, where it's like not every wedding that your characters are involved in D&D has to be the sort of traditional Western wedding. Although now I'm wondering about a social heavy D&D campaign where the characters are all wedding planners and every encounter is just like traditional weddings, but like, or super political heavy weddings where it's like anybody could be assassinated at any time, or
someone's like the head of security, or
right, and then and then it's like, and then it's a goblin wedding, and then it's like this like like northern sort of pseudo Viking wedding, and then
this sounds like a TV show that should be made that would have a lot of people watching it, like a Say Yes to the Dress in Faerun. I think that could be a really amazing. I mean, I don't know how much fun you'd have doing a whole campaign of that, but for like some level of that, could be. It's a fun idea. It's a fun thought experiment.
Then there's rival wedding planners that are always trying to sabotage your weddings, and that and that sort of sets up that protagonist and antagonist relationship.
Definitely. That idea has some legs. I don't know if I want to run with it, but it has some legs. To kind of shift the energy of this here, we kind of brushed on weddings, festivals, events that are low stakes, high fun. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of talked about sort of court case style, low, like fun for the characters, still fun to play, but like low casual fun, high stakes. Mm-hmm. Let's go to something that's kind of very low fun, very somber, very low stakes, and talk about funerals in D&D. Character deaths or important NPC deaths, and how you celebrate their lives and mourn them in play.
Well, obviously, if the players are going to be involved in a funeral, it should either be a player's funeral, or it should be, in most cases, it should be somebody either very important to the NPCs or very important to the PCs or very important to the world, I think. Yes. I think it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to just be involved in every NPC's funeral.
Yeah, or funeral.
Or wedding. It's true.
This rule does go both ways there.
But, if it's somebody that's very important to the PCs, though that can be very emotional moments. Obviously, if a player character has died, not every player character gets a funeral. Neither of the two starter characters that died the first session of the campaign that I ran a year or two ago, they did not get true funerals.
I think that Matty G's character, Sir Armstrong, buried them and said a few words, but it was kind of just him and a rescued damsel. There wasn't
he had other things going on.
He had to get somebody to safety, so he didn't have time to do a full wedding or full funeral ceremony.
And quite often, it's either the whole party that dies or a player character dies in such a way that like either isn't deserving of a funeral or there's no body to give one. And player characters can just kind of be assholes sometimes. They're quite often player characters are just more the people to be like, you say a couple words, take a drink from my flask, pour one out, and
walk away. Yeah,
we're on the move again. But funerals can be phenomenally important character moments.
It can be impactful.
Obviously, Spardour's death and funeral marked the shifting point in that campaign. Not hard 180'd. We were sort of involved in that quest line anyway, but it
became very personal.
Defined. It's really set in stone the direction we were taking. And I think NPC funerals have the potential to do the same thing. Funerals should be RP heavy and impactful. Yeah,
I completely agree. With Spardour's funeral as the example, I mean that it was a epic death, a very key moment, and especially, I mean, NPCs it should be impactful and important too, but especially for a character death in a campaign, especially when it's been running for a while, and you have like one of the core people go down and stay down. It doesn't have to be this emotional, real people in tears sort of thing. I mean, some groups are invested enough in their characters that that's how it goes. But it should be this moment of like honoring and remembering the character that passed, and this kind of like homage to that character. It's very therapeutic, I think, for the person who just lost the character too, to see the other players in character being like, this guy, this girl was a hero. They did these things. We remember them for this. We miss them. We will carry on their legacy. It gives this kind of last hurrah moment for a player who lost their character in a previous session.
No, absolutely. And it's excellent opportunities, especially in the case of either player character death or in the an NPC that was, close to either the whole party or a particular member of the party. They're excellent times to just sort of reevaluate elements of your character and decide, and just sort of decide how this begins to affect your character, if it affects them at all, or lessons a character would draw from this, or stuff like that. It's sometimes hard to find moments to step back and reevaluate elements of your character.
Yeah,
funerals can be a very easy time to do that.
I think that one example of this kind of shift too, that was like a very statistical number crunch change in a character. I believe when Spardour died, it might not have been that session, but right around that time was when Tom was getting his 3rd level in Paladin and chose the Oath of Vengeance, I believe. And all of a sudden his Paladin Oath was to avenge his fallen hero friend against this evil empire.
Yeah.
And that's like, that worked really well with the plan he had for that character anyways, but it gave him a reason. And all of a sudden, like, then Brody playing his new character across him, it's like, he's an oath of vengeance for my character. Like, he is avenging what happened. And that's really powerful. And that's really impactful. It's cool. And then, just like you said, another example of this, I think, although a less heroic or happy one, was the death of Armstrong. And I don't think we had so much as full of a funeral ceremony for him as we could have.
No, it wasn't quite like Spardour's funeral, where there was kind of like, it's like the whole town's in mourning, and we shut down the pub early so that like the party can get hammered, and swear vengeance on the Empire and all that.
Whereas with Sir Armstrong's death, first of all, there was not a body to bury because he died in Dragon's Fire with but a helmet and sword remaining, from what I remember. But it did still, there was like kind of a somber moment there with a character death, where for my character it was kind of this realization. When you talk about a character shift, it was this realization of like, my training wheels are off, or my bumpers, my safety, the thing that keeps the bad person I am from too badly affecting the world is gone. Because my character was a ruthlessly, like, he was doing the right thing more often than not, but he was ruthless and he was heartless in a lot of ways. And Sir Armstrong in that game was the heart of the party. He was the compassionate one. He was the heroic one. And then all the characters all of a sudden realized, like, we don't have that part of the team anymore. And what does that mean for all of us? Where do we go from here? And those are impactful moments. And it brings out that kind of therapeutic moment for the player who just lost a character to see like, wow, this is affecting the story. My death meant something.
Well, and I know in sort of the second Dracos campaign that we did, Tristan's first character got a funeral when I accidentally killed him during a combat.
Yeah.
And that campaign, and that character in particular,
it's a sad story.
Went through a lot of hardship as far as accidentally being responsible for the death of a party member, a couple of different at least one important NPC. And it really, like, those, letting the funerals stand as sort of defined moments to think about what you've done in those moments do really matter. I think if done right, the funeral will have a greater impact than the death itself, partially just because it's a moment to actually reflect and consider what has happened.
I think that's very true. And I mean, if you're doing character death right, in my opinion, then the character death moment will matter and it'll be impactful, but it should be a more of like a heroic sacrifice or a big moment that is exciting and cool and a like, I'm dying, but I'm doing this in the process. Whereas the funeral is that moment where you have to kind of take a breath and sit inside of that. Instead of being proud and excited and pow, this is a cool, exciting, if sad moment, it's just the calm after that. It's the calm following this big hectic storm where now you have to sit there and think about what that means.
It's a moment the characters have to realize that this change has occurred and this person is gone. And that's why I think it works best with player characters and with important NPCs. Because if a character has a like mentor character that not that we're trying to continue the idea that like as a player character you can't have anybody important in your life because the DM will just kill him.
DM will kill him to make a point.
But a funeral for one of those characters, especially if it's somewhere in the middle of the campaign, marks an absolute turning point for that character.
It does.
And that they don't and the funeral gives that character a moment to decide on that path and decide on that change. And
that often will come through as a moment in role play too, where maybe they give some final words for their fallen mentor, and then that's when they make their I will carry on your legacy speech, or this person has died for this cause. Because of this, we should be even more fired up to pursue this cause. In the case of Spardar's death, it just lots of awesome role play moments come from that, and it can be a very somber and real emotional experience for players. As a DM and as other players there too, it's important to emotionally support each other, right? Because for some people, they are very attached to their characters, and a character death and the funeral following it could be something that is emotionally taxing on them as a human being in the real world. So while it can be therapeutic for that person to see the people honoring the life of their character, also just be there for your other players and make sure they're doing all right with that, and that you guys still laugh and have fun and enjoy the game in the process.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So any other sorts of weird encounter events like that you can think of that are sort of fun to throw into a
social campaign? So we've gone over weddings, funerals, festivals, and court cases. I mean, heck, you can start mixing them all together, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, another thing, something that really, these are all kind of a part of it, but something that a spell that was actually released originally as an Unearthed Arcana, and I think it might have been canonized since then, I'm not sure. The ceremony spell for paladins and clerics is super cool. And you might have to look it up to see. I know a couple of the things in it, but it's like a pretty powerful short-term benefit that can only be given to certain players who meet a requirement once really in a lifetime for most of them, unless they like remarry. So like a marriage is one of them, but another one of them is like a coming of age. And using that ceremony spell and having events based around that, if you have like a young character in the party who's kind of like a squire to a knight, or a young warrior coming into prominence. Them, like a coming of age ceremony, could be super fun and cool.
Well, and those are excellent, like, to me, like early game quest lines and stuff. Because we talk about how often it works very well to railroad your players for the first couple sessions,
especially if it's a newer group,
and especially if it's a newer group, and then cut them loose. That's something like a coming of age sort of quest or something is an excellent way to get a party involved with each other if they're all from the same village or from the same city and they're all sort of undergoing the same ceremony. And it could be a whole mini adventure that begins to set up elements of your story. But yeah, culminating it with this ceremony.
I mean, that just gives me an idea for a start of a campaign right there that I didn't have before. All of a sudden you have a game where you have your players are all youngsters in a village who are kind of in that coming of age. And then like one of the first encounters they go on, maybe some great big hunt that their tribe goes on, and they have to face a certain animal one-on-one, and each of them has to complete some sort of task to be deemed an adult or like a coming of age. And then you do a ceremony of that. And there may be the statistical benefits of that coming of age ceremony from the ceremony spell. But on top of that, there's this role play situation where it's like whatever society they're from, whatever their ceremonial thing they do is, then you get to, as a DM, come up with that. Some sort of song or dance or chant or oath that has to be taken. And same thing with like another good example here, a player getting knighted. We've had that happen in a couple games. All of a sudden there's a knighting ceremony, and there can be a party based around that. There could be a moment where there's a specific ceremonial step-by-step process that happens that is that knighting ceremony, and the players get to be there for that and make it matter. Make those social things matter.
And that's like, I'm disappointed that I didn't make Armstrong's knighting ceremony more of a big deal in that campaign. Partially because I wanted it to kind of be a surprise. I like the idea of you guys, like, of him having to escort his own armor to where he's going to be knighted without knowing it. But I just should have made a bigger deal of that. I think it would have been nicer. I think that would have sort of landed a little harder if I had. And I also think that you're, to some degrees, pointing out a real detriment in a lot of RPG systems is in like spells like this. There's just so few of them.
There are.
Like, the spells that exist are very unlikely to be taken by a lot of player characters, just because, like, statistically it's not necessarily worthwhile to take it. But in worlds where magic would exist, there would be a lot of these sort of just like blessings on a married couple, or blessings on a childbirth, or on a coming of age ceremony and stuff. And if you're a DM and you're good at making your own rituals and making your own spells, play around with this. Really,
you could do something very fun.
Really, like, and make your players involved in it, to like either collecting ingredients or making them just like really a part of the ceremony. But make spells or rituals, like these sort of blessings and stuff, to mark important occasions, part of your world and part of your story, because then they just like become part of the characters in those events. And if they have statistical benefits or not, it's just sort of, to some degree, is a different conversation. But
and if you're a DM and you have a player who has the ceremony spell, I mean, clerics kind of get to pick their own spells, so they kind of all have ceremony, but make there be opportunities to use it, and make them be at cool key moments. So for instance, I don't know exactly what all the benefits from these are, but say there's a bonus that would make a character better in combat for the next week or something like that, next day. The day before a big fight, have that coming of age ceremony happen. And then they get to have that bonus and actually use it. Because the reason people shy away from a spell like ceremony is it gives a cool bonus once ever per person, per type of thing. And they have to meet very certain requirements to get it. So if they take it and they use it, make that bonus come into play. Don't make them have and be like, oh yeah, and you get this bonus, which goes away because you have to travel for a week now to go do this other thing, and it's gone by the time you get there.
It's playing a video game and drinking the potion of fire resistance, and then it took you longer to get through the dungeon than you thought, so by the time you actually enter the boss room, like,
it's worn off and the dragon one-shots you.
It's like tabletop RPGs, we have much greater control over what does or doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, so much of it comes down to the dice, but as far as that kind of timing, yeah, unless you're doing like a hex crawl where it is like literally outside of your control, yeah, make that matter. Make it worthwhile.
And if you're a player, another idea here for you out there. If you play a class that's not a cleric, paladin, etc., but you do like a priestly sort of background to your character, maybe your character's like a monk who's from a very like religious, devout order or something along those lines, you can totally do one of the like arcane initiate or probably ritualist feats and start with ceremony as one of those. And then all of a sudden your character's like kind of just a priest. Like he actually is a priest who doesn't have to be a full-on cleric spellcaster to use something like that.
Well,
and then make those be events that matter. And like,
no, absolutely, that's an excellent idea.
Yeah, that's just a fun idea to throw out there too.
And it's the reason that spell is interesting and spells like that are interesting is the same reason that parties are fun and weddings are fun and like the court case was fun and stuff. It's just showing a different side of these tabletop RPGs that we all love. And sure, quite often there's going to be a combat encounter at a party or at a, or at a wedding, whether it's sort of overt or not. But those aren't intrinsic to those settings and events being interesting and just really adding a lot to a story in a very sort of understated way, I think.
It's a great opportunity for the DM and the players to just take a breath and enjoy an event that doesn't have to take itself super seriously all the time. It doesn't have to have super high stakes. The whole point is for people to either have fun or have an emotional moment, and it really breeds and brings out role play. All of these sorts of events do. And the more you lean into it and the more the players lean into it, the more you'll get out of it and have a really fun, interactive role play experience.
Absolutely.
Do you have any other thoughts on this at all, or I think that's a decent place to call it?
Yeah, I think we can end it there.
All right. Well, I hope you all have enjoyed this. Hope you enjoyed some of the stories. If you have, please leave a like or put a comment down below on your best wedding story from a D&D game or your saddest funeral story, maybe.
Or your best D&D story from a wedding.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe your one-shot kobold wedding story for your friend. You could give us that story. Anyway, please feel free to throw anything like that down in the comments below. We hope you all enjoyed and found this useful. Now go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities.
Are you sick of doing intros today?
If you'd like to, you're welcome to.
I mean, I can if you want me to.
You go right ahead. You go right ahead.
What's going on? Ready? Are you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Hey everybody, Will here from Downtime Activities back with Matt Erickson. That was terrible.
It was great. It was just until you said back with.
Back with. Here again.
Back with Matthew. My name, of course, Back with.
Mr. Matthew.
Knowledge.
We should probably do a bonus action podcast at some point on like weddings, funerals, and stuff like that
in court cases.
In court cases and stuff like that
that is 100% a future. I'm adding that to the list right now.
Because and I don't know if we want to roll that sort of faintly wedding themed one shot into that where we just played
100%
where we were just five couples in a trench coat.
Talk about that right now because now that's got me excited.
Sure, yeah. If that's what you're excited about, if that's what you want to talk about.
Funerals.
I fucked up the intro bad enough that we can talk about whatever we want.
In RPGs. All right, I like it.
You like it?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do that one instead.